Hey everyone, I'm Cappy and you're watching Beyond the Plate, but just a taste. If you'd like to hear this podcast episode in its entirety, you can do so on all major podcast platforms. As for me, I'm a chef by trade and hospitality professional. These days, I head up Rachel Ray's culinary operations and co-founded her cooking and kids charity called Yummo. 5 years ago, I had the idea to put together a podcast where we sit down with the world's culinary elite and explore their journey into the food industry and the social impact they have made in their community, how they give back, hence the name Beyond the Plate. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you listened before, we're so glad you're back. We're bringing you a little taste of our full audio episodes here and hope it inspires you to cook or, like the chefs we feature, make a difference in your community. Reminder, the entire conversation is on our podcast Beyond the Plate. On to this week's episode. We're going to jump right in here. As Executive Director of Culinary and Product Innovation at Panda Restaurant Group, the vision and let's call it responsibility you have for, I'm using air quotes, American Chinese cuisine is really on a very different level than a lot of chefs we've spoken with on Beyond the Plate. They may have one restaurant, or two. It's pretty extraordinary, I think, when I try to wrap my head around it. So I'm curious, what is the mission or the driving force for Panda Express as we're celebrating, I think it's close to, if not the 40th anniversary?
Yeah, definitely. The company itself has been established since 1983. And, the mission or the main focus, as from my lens particularly, really is trying to connect communities and then also be a bridge to the American when it comes to what is the authentic way that they can taste the cuisine that maybe myself and our founder, or just in general, what Chinese cuisine can be, right? And so by combining with cooking, and then using sort of the ingredients that people are known of from the States, and then transfer and then transplant into that the recipes that people can understand and enjoy, and ultimately find that connection and comfort. And that's always something that we care about. And then that's our driving force.
Love that. I think a lot of people don't recognize the Panda Restaurant Group actually started as a nicer, finer dining, if you will, Chinese restaurant in Glendale, California, if I'm not mistaken, called Panda Inn, which still exists to this day. But my main producer, Shant, of this podcast grew up in Glendale, so he grew up his entire childhood going to Panda Inn and loves it. But can you share how Panda Express came about?
Sure. Our Panda Inn restaurant actually started in the city of Pasadena.
Okay.
That's the very first location. We call it the mothership, right?
Yeah, got it.
And then, of course, from that opportunity, our founder, the business itself, kind of grew within a community, and people just loved the food. And then there was a business opportunity to have a location that's attached to the Glendale Galleria Mall.
Got it.
And this was kind of like, imagine 80s, right? Food court, people are starting to move on to this space of like, I want fast, I want quick. And then, the business opportunity was, hey, can Panda do that? Can Panda do the same taste, the same food, but done it in a way that didn't feel like you need to like formally sit down, be served by a waiter. And also people can find themselves being sort of like, hey, I'm shopping, but I'm also can kind of take a segue and then get some really good Chinese food and then be on my way. And, that's the genesis of it, right?
I love it.
And of course, the business opportunity came, and then we got a chance to move into the Galleria and open the first Panda Express.
I love that. And so you mentioned your founder, Andrew, I believe his name is, and was his father was the chef initially of Panda Inn?
Yeah, our founder, Andrew Chern, his father's name is Ming Sai Chern. He's actually a classically trained Sichuanese chef.
Wow.
And of course, he was at the helm originally at the Panda Inn before he retired. So, imagine this kind of father and son duo sort of created this brand, this business itself. And ultimately, the food itself become, it morph, right? It evolved over time. Sichuanese essence still there, but a lot of flavor profile really came from our founder's origin, which is from Yangzhou, China. And then, of course, right, we are feeding the mass. So during that time, there's a lot of emphasis on sort of this flavor profile called Mandarin that covers a lot of different territories and regionalities. And then that became sort of the focuses of our food.
Love it. So for many Americans, Panda Express could be their first exposure to Chinese food, Chinese inspired food. How does this make you feel? Actually, I have twin 4-year-olds who I've taken them out to various, Asian cuisine-esque restaurants, and they try things, but I took them to Panda Express for their first time Saturday night. We had the Cub meals.
Oh, that's great. That's good to hear. I know that it certainly is the gateway to a lot of folks right across the United States. And I can speak to my personal story.
Yeah.
I remember, freshman in high school, I got a chance to hang out with a couple of different folks, just friends from basketball team. And then we were supposed to grab a bite afterwards, right? And I remember me going to a nearby Chinese market and bought the food similarly, right? Like, some sort of chicken, some sort of beef item over rice. And then for some reason that day, I also felt like I was compelled that I need to also stop by Panda Express again, something similar, and brought both of them to them. And then needless to say that all of them gravitate towards the Panda food. And basically the reason why is the visual, the color appearance, the way the food speaks to people is connection, is comfort, right? They found comfort looking at the Panda food right away. While the other food may be extraordinary, maybe after taste, of course, but somehow the connections to our food right away was Panda.
How do you describe American Chinese cuisine?
I would say that for us, our philosophy really is focusing on, we always want to focus on the Chinese origin, right? And then, because we are living in the United States, it's a big melting pot. It has a lot of global influences. So that would be the second part. And the third part is we are feeding Americans, right? So there is got to be a way that we can connect to that American perspective across the board, West Coast to East Coast, small town to big town, blue collar, white collar, right? And then so when you combine those three, to us, that's what American Chinese cuisine is about.
That's really interesting. Let's talk orange chicken, because how can we not? Safe to say you all made it famous here, huh?
Yeah, you can say that for sure.
Give us the orange chicken story. Although, I want to back up a second, because it's interesting you mentioned that, like using traditional flavors and things, because I don't think, a lot of Americans are used to, whether they go to Panda Express or another Chinese restaurant that may be catering to an American palate, I don't think people realize dishes like Kung Pao are traditional Chinese dishes. I think they're throwing, they think they're seeing sweet and sour this, or and they just think that it's like an Americanized thing. But I don't think they realize there's like a number of dishes that actually are traditional Chinese dishes.
Often enough that all the dishes that people are familiarized through the American Chinese cuisine definitely had a Chinese origin at one point. Imagine, immigrants, migrants that came to this country, they want to make a specific recipe, right? But it's lacking the ingredients or the resources. So what do? Right? We morph, we adapt, right? We didn't get the traditional gailan, which is Chinese broccoli. So what's the next best thing? Something a little bit bitter, a little bit crunchy. And then, of course, they're like, hey, broccoli might be it. Next thing you know, instead of making the traditional beef and gailan, now they're making beef and broccoli. And essentially, that is a Chinese dish, but it's popularized because it was made with broccoli, right, in the States.
It's a great example.
So Kung Pao chicken shared a similar story. It is a famous dish within the Sichuan region. And of course, our founder's father was such a unique chef in the Sichuanese cuisine. He wanted to create his version of American Chinese compound. So it does have all the full flavor of the boldness, but he added a lot of freshness to it by adding different vegetables to it, right? And that's kind of the way Panda is. We're always focusing on making sure that we didn't lose the essence or the origin of how the dish came about, but it's how we're going to adapt to it that each person can find a connection, and then that they can say that, well, I understand that now because I recognize something within this dish. And then once they had it, they're like, hey, yeah, I can imagine myself eating this again because I understand it now, right? We want to make that a connection first before we try to oversell you this idea of what this taste is.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool that you get to tell that story and your team gets to tell that story. I love that. Okay, back to orange chicken. Give us the story there.
Sure. Orange chicken. So imagine it's a business trip, right? Our founder, the previous executive chef, Andy Cao, they're in Hawaii, they're doing their business. And of course, there was a task by the founder to the chef and says that, they need something special here, right? And then the chef, of course, start to work on the idea doing a sort of a citrus flavored glazed dish. So imagine he fried up crispy chicken and then trying to think about what kind of flavor could it influence or give the essence to the citrusiness. And then he thought of, California, throughout the United States, there's a lot of different citruses around. So orange seems kind of tops it all, right? So imagine now orange is in play. And then, of course, the chef himself, he was actually classic trained in Hunan cuisine. So this is a region that's known for chili and heat, garlic, aromas, and things like that. So just the 1, 2, 3 combo combined together, that kind of became the birth of the first iteration of orange chicken, right? And then our founder tried it. He was like, "Oh my God, this is great. Let's just test it out in the market." But our founder was also in a space where like, hey, guess what? Like this is complicated. It's very big. It's hard to eat. And then so he recommended that, hey, shouldn't we make that a little bit more bite-sized? Why don't we do even more? Why don't we get rid of all the bones? Let's just go with all meat, right? Let's just celebrate this dish by making it easier to eat, very easy to enjoy between kids and adults. And then that slowly become the item that we have today.
What would you say is the hardest part of your job?
The hardest part of my job, I would say, is predicting the future. Because we're always thinking ahead, right? As I mentioned earlier. Now, imagine trying to understand what the consumer wants and needs before they do. I think that's always the hardest thing to do.
It's wild, yeah.
And then the second part about predicting the future is also really making sure that we had the capability and do our job well, right? We don't want to do this 50%. If we're going to do it, we're going to go all the way. That's always been our mantra as a group, as a company, as an organization. And then, we want to make sure that whatever we put out is the best foot forward.
Yeah, like that. What's the most fun part?
The fun part really is working with people, working with groups of people that cares about it just as much as you do, right? From communication level to the creative side, to my own team who are, constantly thinking about innovating, creating. And we always joked around, right? We're the type of team that you give me a piece of paper, I end up selling you a boat or something like that, right? And then so that's where everything is at. That's where the jazz is. That's where the fun stuff, right? And then that gets me excited coming to work on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks for watching and listening to Beyond the Plate. I hope you enjoyed a little taste of this episode. If you'd like to hear this podcast episode in its entirety, you can do so on all major podcast platforms. I'm Cappy, and remember, there are never too many cooks in the kitchen.